really today, my hopes by the end of my message is that all of you, regardless of where you are in life, whether this is your full-time job, kind of like your traditional 8 to 5, or if you're doing this part-time around a career elsewhere, or you have, a spouse and kids, or whether you're a college student, just trying to work part-time consistently around classes in your social life, that this gives you a little bit of clarity that you can have your cake and eat it too, so to speak. You just have to be really effective with managing your time. But just so I can kind of read the room, if you don't mind, with those of you that are in school right now, give me just like a quick wave. Like, how many of you are actively? Okay. A lot of you. Okay, cool. And then for those of you that aren't, that's great too. I'm sure most of what I'll talk about today applies directly to you as well. But like Kyle said, I started working here halfway through my junior year of college. And truthfully, at that point in my life, most of the jobs that I had were just over summer breaks and winter breaks. I did have like a month and a half stint working in campus dining hall my sophomore year, and I really quickly decided I'd never wanted to do that again. But Cutco was kind of the first job that I'd ever really considered taking with me when I went back to school. Okay, I never really carried one job from like a summer or winter break into the semester. But one thing that my initial division manager, Justin, always taught me was like, when you get really effective at managing your time and your priorities, you really are going to be surprised with how much you can get done in a day or a week. So really to kickstart things, I want to lay the framework for you that every single one of us on this call right now, we all have the same amount of time, right? There's 168 hours in a week, or as Grant Paterakis likes to say, there's 1,000 minutes in every day where you're not sleeping. And it really is all about how are we spending our time? Okay. One thing I think that's pretty much universal, regardless of your circumstances right now, is we probably all need to get a good night's rest. You're working hard here, you're working hard either in class or at another job, or really involved with your family. So let's just assume you sleep 8 hours a day. That's 56 hours your week. Boom. We can account for that right there, right? It's taken care of. For those of you that are in school, I'm just going to assume like a kind of a regular college schedule. You're taking 15 credit hours this semester, assuming you go to all your classes, that still leaves you with 97 hours left in the week. I know that it probably varies person to person how much time you actually spend studying and doing homework. I think someone once recommended to me that I should spend 2 hours outside of class for every hours that I was in class every week. I definitely didn't do that when I was in school, but I'll just say you work pretty hard outside of class with, studying for exams, writing papers, doing assignments. Say you do a full day's work of classwork, outside of sitting in your lectures. There's still 74 hours left that we can play with here. And then there's some stuff that I'll throw under like personal care, right? For those of you that like to work out or do yoga or run or what have you, feeding yourself, your body, your mind, your spirit, all of that, there should be time in your week for that. Okay. I'd kind of consider that like a non-negotiable in my life. Got to take care of me first. And if it's an hour every day, that still leaves us with, in my eyes, 67 hours to play around with here. So, and for you, there might be some other kind of non-negotiables in your schedule, things you think may meet that initial must-do list. But I think for all of us, or at least most of us, there should be about 60 to 67 hours remaining in your week. And the biggest question we're left with is, how could you spend it, or how should you spend it? And we're going to talk a little bit about that here today. So earlier this year, I read a book from Stephen Covey called, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'm sure some of you have read it. It's great. It's pretty content dense, but in the book, there's this quadrant of the relationship between things that are urgent and important. Okay. Just quick show of hands. How many of you have checked and by the way, no judgment, by the way, this is honesty hour. How many of you have got like a push noti on your phone from like Snap or Insta and you checked it just instinctively, right? During these last 2 hours of this conference today? I have. Like, I got a text from a couple people during Vern's message and just like my phone buzzes, I look down. It's pretty normal. In my eyes, that's something that's kind of like urgent, right? When my Snapchat goes off, but it's not necessarily important, right? On the flip side of things, if you look at that top right quadrant, how many of you are planners? You like to think ahead. and kind of, Angela, I see you like you were nodding your head immediately, like Trinity, your hand shot up, right? For me, that's something that's not necessarily urgent. It doesn't need to get done right now, but I know that every single week in my life, it is really important for me personally to map out what I want to see for the next 7 days, right? So when making a schedule, I always want to make sure I make time for that. Those things in that top left quadrant, the urgent and important, that's kind of like the do nows. Like if you're sitting in lecture and your professor's like, hey, by the way, pop quiz, you have the next 50 minutes to do this. It's going to be, 5% of your final grade. Sounds kind of important, right? Sounds like it's got a timestamp on it. Probably should get that done right away. And that bottom right-hand corner, that not urgent, not important, for me, that's like watching Criminal Minds on Netflix. As important as it may seem in the moment, not exactly, a definitive time that I need to do that. And, we could argue how important that actually is. So, why I share that with you to kind of pre-frame things, for those of you that have read the book, it gets a lot of critical acclaim. I think it's a great resource, and I'll link it at the end here. But it always reminded me of this talk that Dane Espegard gave probably 2.5 years ago at an event very similar to this, about the 2 hats that he wears every week. And he was talking to, a room full of like aspiring vector managers. A lot of them were in the Leadership Academy program. Some of them have already opened offices. But he talked about being a division manager and how he still tried to treat himself the majority of the time like an employee at Walmart or McDonald's. Okay. And he told us in that meeting that every single week he wears 2 hats. He's got his boss hat and he's got his employee hat. Right. And the way Dane was explaining it to me was that every single week for 1 hour a week, he gave himself permission to be the boss. Right. He's like, this is the 1 hour of the week where I sit down, I make my schedule for the week ahead with my family, for my business, for, my personal life, all of it. This is where I'm in charge. And I can really set my intentions for what I want to see for the next 7 days. And after that hour on a Saturday, I take off my boss hat, I put on my employee hat, and now I just work the schedule that my boss told me to do. And for me, it was kind of like a light bulb moment. I was like, at this point, I had been a district manager for over a year, and I was like kind of used to doing my own thing, And it reminded me of being in college for the first time my freshman year, where I had so much freedom to do whatever I wanted, right? Like in high school, I felt I was very regimented. I was expected to be certain places at certain times. College, similarly, right? There were lectures that I was supposed to go to, but I also knew that I could dip and get the notes or the recording or something like that, and it wouldn't make a very big deal. And I liked that liberty, but sometimes it was really easy for me to take it a little too far. And what Dane showed me was you can still be in charge, make all the decisions all the time. But for me and many people, I found that giving myself a lot of structure really helps me accomplish everything that I want to do. And that's what I'd encourage you to think about leaving today is, when am I going to put on my boss hat every week, make some decisions for what I want to get done that week, and then can I be the employee of the year and follow through on my schedule, right? I also remember being at an event very similar to this where Jesse Jorgensen gave a talk about how do you actually make a schedule? Like, what do you put in there, right? You put like your wake up time, bedtime, stuff like that, but what should actually be in there, and how do you know what to prioritize first? And the analogy Jesse gave everybody was, let's say I've got a big bucket, okay, and I fill it up with these huge rocks. Bucket's full, right? Well, maybe not, because if I get a pile of these smaller pebbles and I start pouring those into the bucket, those smaller pebbles start to fill up all the little cracks left by the bigger rocks in my bucket. Is everyone following me? So I got this big bucket full of giant rocks and tiny pebbles. Now the bucket's got to be full until I start adding in sand, right? Really, really, really tiny rocks. And those start filling up all the cracks left by the bigger rocks and the pebbles. And it's jam-packed pretty tight, right? Got to have a full bucket at this point. So I turn on the garden hose and I start filling up the bucket with water. And the water is going to seep in all the little cracks left even by those tiny little sand particles. And the way Jesse explained this to me was, it's about your must-dos, your need-tos, your have-tos, and your should-dos and your want-tos. Like all these different things, there's a variety of different activities that you've got to get done in your schedule. Like these are the need to do's. They've got a deadline. They're important. Put those in your schedule first. And I was like, okay. For me as a student, that would be like, I need to go to class at Thursday at 2 p.m. until 3:15, and I need to study accounting, right? For that hour 15 that I'm sitting in accounting class. Like that's a non-negotiable. Does that make sense? The pebbles, like the have to do's, were things that they were still really important. They needed to get done at some point, but there wasn't that timestamp on them, right? Something like that would be doing my accounting homework before Tuesday. Does that make sense? I don't need to do it Monday morning. I don't need to do it Monday night, but at some point before Tuesday, it's got to get done. The sand was like the should do's, like, kind of brushing my teeth, doing my laundry, going to the gym, things that were important that added value that I wanted, but they had even less urgency than those pebbles. In the water, he was like, that's the fun stuff. It's going out with your friends. It's binging Netflix, it's playing, whatever game you want to play. Fill in the last cracks in your schedule with things like that. Watch what happens in a week. Okay. And so this is an example of what a schedule of mine in college kind of looked like. I started doing this, making a weekly schedule the older I got. And, the first things in my schedule are my have tos, right? Math class, science class, whatever kind of class you have, right? Boom. All those green boxes filled it up first. Then it was my need tos. Okay. The things that they had to get done, but I had a little bit of wiggle room as to when I would get them done. And for those of you that are students, by the way, something that I always tell my reps in my office is at the start of a week when you're making the game plan, give it your best guess as to how long you think an assignment's going to take, and then add another 50%. Okay, if you think a paper is going to write, take 2 hours to write, give yourself 3 hours. It'll just give you a little bit more time to sit back and not stress. Okay, worst case scenario, you use all 3 hours. Best case, you get an extra hour of freebie time, right? Those orange boxes, the should do's, that would be like meals, right? I didn't put laundry in there, or things like that, but that's where it would be for me, the gym at the top. And the 1, 2 is like having fun. Okay. Now, I'm not saying this has to be your schedule, but if you ever choose to do something like this, it's been really helpful for me in the past number of years of my life to kind of approach it in this way, making sure I've got all the big things taken care of first, and I can kind of fit in the smaller things in the cracks where it makes sense. So how do you put this into practice in the Cutco context? Okay. Again, we're at this event, hopefully because you want to learn something that you can then implement on your demos so that you sell more Cutco and make more money, right? That is the reason that we're here. And a lot of times when I work with students during the fall and the spring, we really do have to keep our eyes on the prize for the long game, right? It's not about a sprint in any one given week, but it's how can we be really consistent on a routine basis to build something big over a longer period of time, okay? So in the Cutco sense, I think pretty much for anybody that's like, a newer rep, if you spend about 3 hours a week making phone calls, you can probably crank 50 calls unless you just have an awesome ratio of the number of people that answer, right? And maybe you don't need to make as many calls as somebody else. Does that make sense? But about 17 calls for an hour spent phoning. That's something I'd probably prioritize in my schedule, right? It doesn't need to be at any particular date and time. But if you make 50 calls consistently every week, I promise you, you'll book 8 demos, right? Maybe more, but at least 8. For those of you that book 8 demos in a week, you'll have 6 of them that actually hold, right? We'll give a little bit of wiggle room for the cancellations or the reschedules or the, oh, sorry, I forgot, right? And if you, in 6 demos, let's just say you have a really long demo. It shouldn't take you this much time, but let's say they're an hour and a half, right? 6 demos is going to take 9 hours up in your schedule. And if you're consistently doing 6 appointments every week around school, around sports, around your fraternity, sorority, clubs, whatever, you should probably sell roughly $1,000 every week, right? Does that make sense? You can give me like some head nods or some thumbs ups. You can shake your head if you're like, that's bogus. I don't believe it, even after listening to Vern. Okay. And for many of you, there's about 6 weeks until summer break, I think. Right? Even if you're at $0 in sales right now, if you do something as simple as that, 12 hours a week carved out, you're going to make at least $1,000 before break. For those of you that are at higher commissions, you might make as much as $1,800 doing 6 appointments a week. Okay. What else do you get though? It's not all about the money. You get the President's Club letter for sure. You're on a sweet consistency club streak. And whether your office is fully staffed right now or not, I guarantee you're on the radar to be an assistant manager candidate. And what does that really look like in terms of time commitments between the demos and the phoning and your office's team meeting? Maxed out, it's like 14 hours of time, right? 2 hours a day. Where can we find those gaps in the schedule to make that stuff fit? But even so, you're not necessarily a Cutco rep first. Okay, for those of you that are students, you are students first, and that should be a priority. For those of you that have spouses and children, you're a mother or a father, a husband or a wife, probably first before you're a Cutco sales rep. But one thing that one of my old managers used to tell me was if you have more than 3 priorities, you really have none. You're kind of stretched too thin at a certain point. So what I'd invite you to do right now is think for a minute about what are the big things in my life that really matter to me. And for those of you that are students, school's got to be on that list, even if you're like, not my thing, right? I think Cutco should be on that list too, right? Can be a kind of a main priority. And then what would the third be? I'll give you an example, by the way. When I was an assistant manager, in between my junior and senior years of college, one of my priorities was doing well at work. That was like a non-negotiable for me. I wanted to really be successful here. Another one, though, was physical fitness. And I was working longer days than I was used to as an assistant manager. So I was like, well, working out is a priority for me. I guess I just have to wake up a little bit earlier than I'm used to make sure I get this done because it really matters. And the third thing was keeping up with my friends over break. Okay. And with those 3 things in mind, it was really easy for me to start saying no to anything that popped up that wasn't in line with one of those 3. It was really easy for me to say yes to going to the gym. It was really easy for me to say yes to working hard at Cutco. It was really easy for me to say yes to make time for my friends. But anything that kind of drew on those 3 things, it was easier to turn down. And I never felt bad about it, right? Sometimes my buddies would like give me flack of like, oh, like you can't go golfing this week. And I'm like, no, I have a really like important goal to me at work and I need to make time to go to the gym. I got to pass on golf this weekend. Maybe next time, give me like a little bit more notice. Right. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, that like sense of calm and certainty in the moves that I was making was something that really helped me to have a great experience over that 4-month stretch. Right. It wasn't that I was saying no to things, is that I was saying yes to more important things to me. And I had a lot of clarity in it. So, whether you've jotted some stuff down right now, or you want to take this with you for, in leaving this meeting, just know that again, with good time management, you can have your cake and eat it too. Identify those 3 most important priorities to you. And when you're putting on your boss hat for a week, let that be reflected in your schedule. Let's make it a great next 4 weeks of the campaign. Let's finish the spring strong and enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you for your time.